And I can say without any hesitation that meeting David at that point in my life was extremely important. Um, I was working alone. I was working in a small town, small city. I didn't know a lot of people. I just moved really from the West Coast, from Oakland, California,
Right.
to New York to teach for the first time. So I'm struggling with learning how to teach, learning how to teach, learning what a teacher was, what a professor is, how to act in the world, um, uh, how to form important relationships with others, with my colleagues and other artists, and how to make work. So it was this sort of incredible, volatile moment in my life that was at the sort of apex of a turn. A
Mm.
turn was about to happen, and I met you at that moment,
Yeah.
David. And so that's for your students.
I
Not
remember that
just
studio visit. I remember that studio visit very well. And you moved to Brooklyn the next year, I believe.
I think so,
Yeah,
or soon
right.
thereafter, maybe a year and a
Yeah,
half
right.
later. Um, some interesting things happened, and maybe we'll get back to that a little later.
Sure. Well,
I
why don't you
want to
take over
share.
this? Why don't you take over this screen? I think I've given you a co-conspirator permission there already. And
Great.
I'm going to turn my camera off, and I will see you at the end of your presentation. I'll come back.
I'm actually going to um, I have no idea who I'm speaking to, where you are, what you look like. I feel like I'm speaking into the void, which is just a little odd, but nonetheless, we're going to start with reading a short text. I'm reading this text because it's a text that I wrote many years ago, but it's also a text that seems to anchor me. It seems to be a kind of poetic guide, a voice that I find important. And it somehow, in a very short way, a very concise way, speaks to my practice and what I think about always in relationship to my practice. A woman stand in the thaw of winter, the beginning of spring, reflecting, considering, imagining, contemplating the past, imagining the future. With one step, she could be in the future in an instant, or in the past, or in the moment, the now. But to get to now, to this moment, she needs to look back over the landscape of memory. Lost in memory, the woman faces history, a history with a story that's been told 1,000 times before. If you look on the horizon here and there, first seen, now hidden, are little sightings of hope, of dreams, of memories. And if you look closely through the corridors of time, even within the horror, one could see the fluttering wings of doves, wings like time batting out beats of hope. Hope was the thing missed, the thing hoped for. You could almost taste it, but it was just out of reach, just above your head. And so I come back to this text over and over and over. I wrote it, I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago. Time is weird for me, but quite a while ago when I was working on a piece called Constructing History. And I think to a large degree, of course, much of my work is really anchored in an ongoing investigation of history, the historic past, and how that past holds on to the future. So one of the things that I thought that I would do, I'm going to show you some work, some photographic work. We'll look at some of that, and then I'm going to show you actually a piece that I just recently made called "Leave Now," which is the story of of my grandfather, and we'll talk about that just a little bit more as we move through this very quick presentation. This piece is called The Considered. This idea of always coming back to the mirror, to this double-edged sword, is almost a constant in my work, and I learn a great deal from my work, because often artists are working from the intuitive, not necessarily with the precise, but the intuitive, working through a set of ideas that are just below the surface. They are just below the conscience, right? They're subconscious, but they mean a great deal, and they allow us artists, they allow me to really sort of speak to and to discover notions of myself. The mirror, the mirror, the mirror, the mirror, the mirror, constantly used throughout the work. This is one of the first pieces that I made long ago in 1990, just before I met David, rather just after I met David, the Kitchen Table series. Now, of course, I've become known in a lot of ways for the Kitchen Table series, but again, using this notion of mirror again and again and again, and establishing, of course, within this project, within the Kitchen Table series, a series of questions that spin around domesticity, the meaning of domesticity, the meaning of family, the meaning of the nuclear family, the role of the nuclear family, the dynamics between men and women within the family, etc. It was a very, very, very important work for me that really spins around also notions of interrogation. What is being interrogated in relationship to the family generally, and the Black family in particular? Several years ago, I was approached by the Park Avenue Armory about producing an exhibition for that would happen there. Initially, because my head often spins around what other artists are doing. Maybe some of you know I've produced a number of gatherings, symposiums, conferences, convenings with other artists. I did a major one in 2014 in relationship to my exhibition at the Guggenheim, and then for this exhibition also at the Park Avenue Armory, where I invited dozens upon dozens upon dozens of other artists to participate with me. And so I'm often thinking about what other artists are doing, how they're making, how they're producing, what it is they're thinking, how they are actualizing their practice. And initially, when I started working on the Armory project, this project called The Shape of Things, I actually thought that it was really going to be that I was going to curate an exhibition that included a number of other artists, and I would include myself within that exhibition. And so for the first 3 years, I think, 2.5 years at least, of working on the Armory exhibition, I designed this program that included maybe 20 other artists. And one afternoon, I went to speak with Tom Eckers, who is at Bard and who was working with me on the exhibition. His designer was sitting next to me. And the designer asked me, I laid out the exhibition, right? I had the sort of plan, the floor plan of the exhibition. We laid it all out. We're standing there, we're looking at it. And he said, oh, okay, so cool. Where are you? Where are you? And I was a little taken aback. It took me a minute, and I thought, where am I? So I thought, okay, well, I could be down here around the corner in the back, maybe. And as I'm saying this to myself, right, or to them, right, that I could be down here, maybe in the back, in that corner, I realized that essentially I had really left myself out of my own exhibition. And so I packed up my material, packed up my bags, closed everything up, and said that I would be back in touch like the next day. And then I made this huge decision not to actually include anybody else in the exhibition in the shape of things, but to do my own exhibition of my own work and my own ideas. And that was really the beginning of really how the shape of things really emerged then finally as this solo exhibition that has now traveled to the Luma Foundation in Arles and to the Barbican in London. It actually just closed at the Barbican just last weekend and will be at Arles for another month or two. But it was a very important thing, right? You know, the role of the curator, the role of the artist, and I've functioned in these sort of both capacities. But really, I'm a visual artist. That is what I do. But I'm interested in my relationship to other artists. How do I work with other artists, and how do I bring other artists into conversation, into dialogue with the work and with the questions embedded, I think, in the work. And so what I did then coming out of this project, out of the shape of things, I did the exhibition, and then I organized a very large 3-day conference that went along with the exhibition, inviting all of the other artists who I had finally excluded from my show to actually speak about their work. All of those artists, and of course, many, many more participated within the overall project. And working on the project as well, I invited several other participants and architects to work along with me to help me sort of think through how to really design my space. I have very strong ideas that I wanted things to live in the round. And I've been thinking about things that live in the round for a very long time. Where, you know, whether I'm thinking about circus and the circus tent as a kind of metaphor for understanding roles of play that also become deeply, deeply serious. The role of the clown, how to talk about our particular political moment within the round, within the circus of politics. And on the other side of that, like this, to think about other issues as well. So this was a very important exhibition for me in a number of different ways, and maybe we'll be able to talk about it a little bit more later. But you know, that I had eliminated myself from my own exhibition was one enormous thing that I really needed to deal with, and why I had done that to myself, why I had actually denied myself when I actually had so many ideas that I was deeply interested in exploring, starting with notions of the circus, which has been something that I've investigated for a very long time. The circus and clowns and clowning, and then being able to bring those ideas to the contemporary as we looked at the ushering out of Obama on the one hand, and the emergence of Trump on the other. Examining the circus of politics has been something that has been key, really, to my practice for quite a long time. And then one of the things that I've learned, my work really teaches me a great deal about what I'm really thinking through. And so a part of the responsibility of the artist, of the maker, whether you are a visual artist or a writer or a poet or a dancer, whatever you feel, whatever it is that you're involved in, part of your responsibility, part of the thing that you have to learn, and the thing that I think is most difficult to learn, most difficult to do, is when to get out of the way of your own work so that you can actually do the work. There are ways that we block ourselves, there are ways that we block our process, but the work is often telling you really what it needs. And if you take a step back and really look at what you've laid out for yourself, maybe through months and or years of working, it starts to tell you what it is. So just like in doing something like The Shape of Things, I made this piece, Lonnie, Lincoln, and Me, Lonnie, Lincoln, and Me, which is a hologram, which is the effects of a hologram, for this piece, thinking about, again, history, the way history repeats itself, using the notion of the hologram, of the ghost, in order to examine a historical past, and then bringing these ideas forward into a project like The Shape of Things. Right, so that there are ways, these ways in which I think your life and your work is layered, that you're interested ultimately in the same thing over a long period of time, over a long period of time. Even as you develop and you have great curiosity, we tend to stay in a certain kind of lane, a certain kind of lane that we're deeply interested in exploring, and that lane actually takes you through a life, and perhaps through your life, as it's taken me through mine. This is an image that is a part of The Shape of Things as well. While we dominated at the Park Avenue Armory, the main floor with the cyclorama on the one hand and all blue on the other, and Lincoln, Lonnie, and Me in a corner, almost functioning as like a triangle, a triangulation of ideas. Along the back corridors at the Armory were 3 bays. And in those bays, because I was thinking again about notions of the circus, I established a series of dioramas or sideshows that function as dioramas, or dioramas that function as sideshows inside along rather that corridor. Again, a very important a conceptual idea to play with and to develop. So this was a memorial to the dead in that space. And this is Missing Links going along the corridor. So going along the corridor, there are these three dioramas that visitors would see. So an important body of work, and it continues to be. And I'm working with it. I'm teasing out elements of it that continue to be of interest, and diving even deeper into these various spaces, the dioramas that I need to unpack more, and that I need to actually pull out and show in a larger space to engage the sort of questions that are embedded within that work. Of course, I'm not a politician. I'm just an artist, that's interested sort of in politics. And to the extent that that we're surrounded by it all. And so in some way, the political is always informing the work. And I suppose to a certain extent, as an African American, and as an African American woman, and as an African American artist, there's no way that that in some way the political can't the political doesn't inform who I am and the work that I make. It's almost an impossibility for me to live outside of the political, simply based on my complexion, who I am, and where I come from, and how the country indeed thinks of me, whether I would want to be identified as African American, woman, gay, Black, whatever. There's a way in which the society was always informing me and letting me know what I am and who I am, even if I would like to believe otherwise. So because I do a number of different kinds of, and making photographs, I build installations, I design lectures, symposiums, etc. And I've done some performance, and I think to a large extent, a lot of the work is a lot of my work is also very performative, and that's not again something that I really thought about much about myself, but it was really the work that really told me that that's indeed who I am and what I do, that I am involved deeply in performance. So whether I'm looking at something like the Kitchen Table series or Romy or the Museum series or the Cuba project, all of these projects involve the use of my own body as a landing site for and to carry a certain kind of meaning. So at a certain point, after understanding that I was indeed involved with acts of performance, I produced another kind of performance, a theater piece that's called Grace Notes Reflections for Now. And it was very much based on, it evolved, I should say, it evolved out of the killing of the Emanuel Nine in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then, of course, I was able to bring to the fore, to the focus, a number of the murders that had happened in the country that had seriously impacted uh, the country and again, specifically the African American community. So as you can see, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, three of the very significant murders that happened before the killing of George Floyd, which became, of course, the straw that broke the camel's back and sent the world scrambling in a way that it has never really scrambled before and that it's still trying to catch up with, which is really remarkable. And maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. I've been working with musicians and choreographers, poets for a number of years, and I've actually put on concerts here and there, music that I really wanted to hear, and music and groups and bands and bands that I wanted to hear in concert with one another, and that's been a really kind of remarkable to do. And in this project, there's Carl Hancock Ruck's an amazing poet who is in the back. Issa Davis, a part of the Angela Davis family. Amani Uzuri standing in the middle, and Alicia Moran on the outside. Three remarkable performers and singers who join me in Grace Notes. A piece by David Hammons, the idea of the hood becoming more and more significant, certainly for a period of time, right? This idea of a Black man in a hood, and that David would distill that meaning into this cut shape, I think is absolutely extraordinary. It's one of those, I'm really jealous, like I'm really upset that I didn't make this, that I didn't think about it myself. This is a plate, commemorating every Black man who lives to see age 21. I think I made this maybe 45 years ago. So in that way, we sort of continue with notions of the changing same, right? That we're still in this sort of holding pattern, where we're coming back to the same ideas over and over and over and over and over. This is a piece called Profiles, again, a part of the same kind of idea, right? That I've made 45 years later or 43 years later, right? Because we're dealing with the changing same, these ongoing issues. Using that, next to partial reports, police reports, police data about certain kinds of men. People in conditions people in conditions, all again related to the same thing, the same kind of act. These could use more in the shape of things. With the death of George Floyd came, of course, as you know, this incredible upheaval. And we were all in lockdown because we were also in COVID. In a moment of COVID, where we lost so many lives, so much was happening, and yet we're all home. We're all witnessing together because everybody is home, because everybody's on lockdown. We're all witnessing this thing, this murder of this man, of George Floyd, who goes probably to the liquor store. I think he was buying beer. I mean, something on a hot summer day. And it ends his life, right? He's murdered. And we all get a chance to see that. And so there's this incredible eruption across the world in a way that something like this had never happened before. Right? Technology makes it happen. YouTube is there. An iPhone, a young girl is filming it on her phone and she posts it live. Everybody is seeing this thing happen. Becomes one of the biggest things that has happened to the world in a really kind of an extraordinary way. It was like a little bomb. So after the uprising, right? I'm looking, I'm thinking, I'm photographing in my neighborhood, photographing in my community. But I'm talking with my mother on the phone. My mother's telling me about the weeks and months later, she's telling me about the demonstrations that are happening in Portland, Oregon, which is where I'm from. And so at a certain point, I decided to go to Portland because I really needed to just sort of see what was happening in Portland, Oregon, and what were the effects of that. What were the lasting impressions of that? And there had been tons of graffiti all over downtown Portland. Downtown Portland was now completely closed down, and all of the graffiti had been painted over. And this is the piece that I'm showing you called Painting the Town. And there may be, I don't know, maybe there are 20 or so of these of images, but all of downtown was essentially boarded up. Everything was locked up. And this was the way that the town had been painted. It was absolutely extraordinary. And I'll continue working on these and defining this project actually as I go. But I've learned like a great deal. They're all like abstract paintings. So then, abstraction comes to mean something else, which is kind of funny, right? Based on the real. Oh, this was something that I did for Prada. I did this project for Prada, and I couldn't believe that they actually wanted the bag back. And so I made another project for them. I made another project. It was so funny, David. I made this project for them, and I used the text, which I can't show you today, but I used the text saying possession is 9/10 of the law. And so, of course, I kept the bag. And Mrs. Prada thought that it was hilarious and she wanted to use it, but all of her legal counsel said, absolutely not. But interestingly enough, this is also working with Hunter Schiffer, who is in that television show Euphoria.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
I think right, Euphoria. And so it was very interesting because Hunter, first of all, Prada had hired her precisely because she's a transgendered woman. And all the texts that I used about her being transsexual, Prada refused to use. So it was sort of a really curious uh, lack of willingness to really deal with why they had actually brought her in to be the face of Prada for this particular campaign. Working with Mary J. Blige, which was really actually a pleasure, because out of all of this sort of artifice, etc., it's just this woman that was really trying to deal emotionally uh, with uh, uh, with her life and pulling her life back together after being so terrorized by her husband. The Hope Peony. I was off. I did a project for W.E.B. Du Bois and decided to name some flowers after him, and so I did the Hope Peony, which is actually available, and you can plant hope in your own garden. So, various kinds of projects from constructing history to this project that that I've just recently worked on around my grandfather, and I've been working a little bit with Yo-Yo Ma presenting the material live. And I'm going to show you a few more slides, and then we're going to come back to this discussion quickly of my grandfather. This is just some installation views from a large project from Stuttgart, where I have exhibitions that are traveling contemporarily around Europe. Just sort of giving you a quick overview of work because we actually don't really have that much time. A project produced about the Black Panther Party for the Logan Museum in Chicago. They were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Panthers. And so I decided to stage a classroom there where we might be able to explore. There's also sound, working with a wonderful composer and musician, Jawad Taylor, to make a really beautiful soundscape using the voices of the Panthers themselves, talking about their lives, building narratives using their narrative to build the sound itself. Really an important project, one that I actually really like very much. Blues and pinks. I made this like 45 years ago or more. I completely forgot about it. And then one day I was kicking a box trying to get it out of my way. And I opened the box only to discover these photographs that I had made so long ago, but I'd really never done anything with. Another way of sort of thinking about this classroom, these ways of building installations. And so, I mean, sometimes they're like very exciting, to build these installations, a space of habitation, to really be and to unpack a whole series of complicated ideas related to very specific people at a very specific time in history. It was a wonderful, wonderful project to kind of tease out for myself. And then I thought that I would spend just a few moments. David, do I have a few moments to sort of share some of this?
You have plenty of time. You have another half hour.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, plenty of time.
My wife asked. Okay. And so, so these various projects have been very important to me. And we, and again, our art really teaches us something. And a part of the ability for the work to teach you something, even as the maker, and even as you're involved in the making, is with that ability to sort of step back from the work and allow the work to do its job and allow the work to speak to you, to really speak to you, to really speak to you. And so, I'm working away, I've done all these various kinds of projects, right? I usually think of myself as being fairly thoughtful, but often the work is much more advanced than I. I'm always actually playing catch up with the work. And so, I thought about, my position, my role, my body, how to use that in space, how to use that in relationship to all these ideas about modernism about, sort of unrequited love, around, all of these figures, these great historical paintings or painters who I deeply, deeply admire, but who never really would consider someone like me as a subject as a subject of their own investigation. How to deal with that as an artist has been a part of my project too. How to build space for myself in a world that has historically denied me has been absolutely crucial to my thinking, to my development, not simply for me, for Carrie, but for, I think, what I hope that I stand for. I hope that, the things that I can stand in for, and for the weight that I am allowed to carry, and how I might use that process, or this process, the stage that I'm granted, in order to elevate a certain set of ideas. And so, um, a couple of years ago, my sister had been doing a lot of stuff around my family. I developed a piece called Family Pictures and Stories long ago. And like, I guess, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm getting really old, but a really long time ago, like, almost 50 years ago. Like, almost 50 years ago. Anyway, so a long time. And so I did the project, Family Pictures and Stories. I did the work. I did interviews with my mother and my father, my siblings. I spoke with my family about my family. And then one day, my sister called me. My sister called me, um, uh, and sent me a photograph of my grandfather. It was the first time that I was actually seeing my grandfather, my father's father. I'd never seen him before. He was not a part of our lives. And she said, "Here, finally, is your grandfather." And I thought about that and looked at the photograph for a long time. And then shortly thereafter, I was invited to do a project as a part of the Great Migration series. And um, and so I started working on this project of the Great Migration series, a movement in every direction. And I decided that I would do the project uh, about my grandfather, that I would focus the project on my grandfather, Frank Weems, who had been a union organizer in the South. And he had been beaten. As an organizer, he had been beaten. He was assumed dead. And because of the relationship of the union, which consisted primarily of a large number of Northerners who'd gone down to the South to aid sharecroppers and poor farmers and former slaves in their progress forward, my grandfather becomes a rather cause célèbre. And everybody was talking about Frank Weems, my grandfather. And it's like, from here I saw what happened and I cried. Who this man becomes, how he becomes that, how he's used by the system, all of those things then become sort of really important to me in trying to tease out the story of a man that I never knew, but who was very important to me, because I always asked my father, well, who was your father? And so I'm going to close this. And are you all with me, David? Am I okay with time?
You're fine, Carrie. That's great.
Okay. So I made this piece. I'm going to show you just a little bit of it. I may jump around, and again, because I'm speaking into the void, it's a little weird for me. This is not my favorite format. We'll watch some of this, and then I suppose I'll speak with students about it later. But the project then that I put together is this project called Leave Now, about my grandfather. And Yo-Yo Ma and I um, um, usually have been performing this together. Okay. Sorry about that. I have no idea what's happening with that. I don't know why it's not playing properly.
Well, I'm sorry we don't get a chance to see that, but I do want to ask you a question before we leave the general audience and go into our seminar, and that is I'd just like you to respond to something that was really quite moving for me. For the last couple of years, I was working on a project with the National Gallery in Washington, and it had always the National Gallery had made me feel that it was the National Gallery of a country I didn't recognize. But all of a sudden, it changed because it got a new director, and they hired you or commissioned you to do a piece that I believe still on view. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about that piece, because the installation that you did there, I think, is indicative of a change not only at the National Gallery but in museums in general, recognizing the specifics of history and not just to pay lip service to Black history. You know,
Right,
the work I'm talking about, of course, right?
I think yeah, I think you're talking about Lincoln, Lonnie, and Me. It's the theater piece, right?
No,
In the Red Room.
I'm talking about the piece you did about the previously anonymous platoon of Black soldiers who fought in the Civil War out of Massachusetts, and there's that monument to them.
The 50.
Uh,
Yes, I'm 54th in it. Yes, the brigade of the 54th from Boston,
right,
Massachusetts.
yeah, and of course, you know, there are two things that you did there that I thought were wonderful. One was the installation of your photographs on the opposite side of the room from the bas-relief, but the other was the research into actually finding the names of all of the soldiers, and they no longer were just an anonymous group of Black men, but they were full human beings with names and lives and histories.
Well, the National Gallery, I think, has really been sort of extraordinary. What they've been doing over the last few years, and that, I believe that they brought that work into their collection.
Why don't you get rid of the screen now, and it'll just be the two of us on the screen, or to the bottom there, and release the screen there.
Right. Thank you for saying that. Stop sharing.
There we go. That's right. So,
so we're all back.
yeah.
Well, there have been a lot of things that have gone on, David, and I find it just a really an extraordinary time. Somebody said to me the other day that never before have people of color been so supported in their projects as at this moment. And it's absolutely true. We had the Harlem Renaissance, but this is nothing like the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, this is really sort of, I think, huge, and it becomes, as you know, at a moment when museums um, have really been, most of them have really been forced to finally deal with who they are, what they've been, and what museums they need to be in the future. A lot of museums, of course, if we continue with slides, a lot of museums, I've been standing in front of museums for a long time, sort of bearing witness to what has not happened in those institutions for over a century. And suddenly, with the sort of death of George Floyd, came this extraordinary propulsion of institutions trying to negotiate and deal with the thing that they hadn't dealt with ever,
Mhm.
ever, and really
Yeah.
hadn't been on their minds. And so, in a lot of ways, it's really an exciting, dynamic moment, but it's also coming to, at a certain kind of expense, because it's a knee-jerk reaction, right? So people have, they were caught with their pants down. They weren't quite prepared for the moment. They hadn't been thinking along these lines, and so suddenly the reality of the world is at their doorstep, and they have to respond with somehow. And some of that has, sort of yielded to, really extraordinarily bad work
Yeah.
across the board.
Well,
But in the midst
I
of
remember
also, some
I
extraordinary work,
remember, oh,
it's very exciting.
I recall that when you had your exhibition at the Guggenheim, and there you were the first woman of color to have a major exhibition at that museum, right?
No, 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 no. I was the first African American to have an
Right.
exhibition
This is
at that
true.
museum.
Okay, but they presented the work, but I'm not sure they served your.
They're
I'm not sure
women.
they served you well, because they presented the work in a fractured way, and in
They
a way
did.
that they might not have if you were not an African American woman.
Well,
And
yeah, I think that the work, I was very happy to have the work there, and you know, an enormous, it was an enormous platform, and
yes,
thousands of
sure.
people came to that institution. But it is true. Um, um, they hadn't thought of it in advance. They weren't the developers of the project. They took the project from the Frisk in Nashville, and decided that it would be an important show, but they didn't give me the ramp, right? So
That's
so it was
and that's what you were talking about before. They wanted to make a
was
move, but they weren't prepared for it in a way. They wanted
they
to
weren't prepared.
change. They wanted to change, but they hadn't really thought through what it meant to change their orientation. I think the Guggenheim's come a long way in maybe 4 or 5 years since that show. Now I can't recall, but and so
2000.
yeah, right, exactly. Anyhow, we're going to end this portion of our seminar right now, and move in a few minutes to the private seminar where we continue this conversation. But I thank all of those of you who have joined us to look at the work that Carrie May is sharing with us, and to listen to her extraordinary narration of the changes that she's seen in her own work, and the changes that she's seen in the world that her work participates in. So thank you so much for this, Carrie May. And we'll see you in a few minutes in the other Zoom space. Thank you all. And those of you watching us on the webinar, we'll be back here in the same place next Monday at the same time. See you then. Bye-bye.